to, boys, I'm very happy for you to turn your camera on so that we can see you. But if you don't want to put your camera on, that's also fine. It's not a problem. It's totally up to you. If you've had a haircut like mine, you probably won't want to put your camera on, I imagine. Larry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all coming across clearly, is it?
Yes.
Because this is a new way of doing this, so I'm trying to do it a little bit more interactively. So, last time we finished reading, we looked at the lamps, where we saw that the Friedrich's family were trying to make some money by fixing lamps for friends and other families, and they were sort of hiding out in their apartment. We're going to move on to a new chapter now called The Movie. And if you've got the script or the book in front of you, do follow along with me. And if you've got any questions that you want to ask at any point, just pop a question mark in the chat box, and I'd be really happy to answer that question at any point that we're in. So, The Movie, 1940. Jude Sus, or Sweet Jew. It said in enormous letters over the entrance. At both sides, paintings depicted heads of Jews with beards and earlocks. The movie was in its 8th week. Whole school classes and police divisions marched to it in unison. Everyone was supposed to have seen it. Because the war restricted most other entertainment, movies were the most important amusement left. And a film so many people talked and wrote about tempted everybody. Friedrich was waiting for me outside a small soap store. I had once been reprimanded in the Hitler Youth for consorting with a Jew, and since then, we only met in those places where we were unlikely to meet people we knew. I looked at the pictures outside, Friedrich told me. I'm really glad you're going with me. I'd never have dared it alone. While Friedrich read the reviews exhibited in the showcases, I went to the ticket window. Beneath the price list was an illuminated sign that read, "No one under 14 allowed." Sometimes they made you show your ID at the ticket window, but no one had asked for it this time, and that's what Friedrich had been afraid of. Although we were already 15, Friedrich only had a Jewish identification card. Did you get them? He asked in a whisper, peering around. I nodded, pleased. Both tickets in hand, I sauntered slowly toward the entrance, looking very confident I was sure. Friedrich followed behind me, making certain I was always blocking him from the view of the lady examining tickets. But she didn't ask for identification either. She didn't even look at us. In a monotone, she murmured her, "To your left, please," and let us go inside. Inside the foyer, Friedrich heaved a loud sigh of relief. I really don't like this stupid cheating, but a movie like this is really important for me, isn't it? We stepped into the dim theatre. An usherette received us and led us to our row. Friedrich thanked her politely. The usherette smiled kindly. We were early, so we got good seats in the centre of the row facing the curtain. Only a few moviegoers sat in the other seats as yet, but nevertheless, Friedrich looked in all directions before sitting down on his folding chair. Then he stretched out his legs and enjoyed the comfortable seat. Upholstered, he said with pleasure, and stroked the soft armrest. Meanwhile, a new and older usherette had come in. She took over our side of the cinema, and the younger usherette went over to the other side. She went through our row of seats. Friedrich jumped up to let her pass. Again, he smiled, gratefully this time. Today is the first time since Mother died that I'm seeing a movie. Adam didn't have to live through all that's happened in the last. Gradually, the theatre filled up. Seats were taken to the right and left of us. Many young people came to this afternoon's performance. The usherettes closed the doors. Everyone waited for the lights to go out. Suddenly, the big ceiling lights went on. Over the loud speaker, a voice announced, "We ask all teenagers to have their IDs ready." Two usherettes began to go through the rows. Starting from opposite ends of the cinema, they glanced briefly at each identification card, sending 2 or 3 teenagers out of the cinema. Everything went speedily and quietly. Friedrich had grown pale. Restlessly, he slid back and forth in his seat. He'd watch the usherettes, and then his eyes would peer along our row. "What are you getting nervous about?" I asked, trying to calm him down. "They're only checking to see if they're really 14. Just let me handle it. All you have to do is show your ID." But Friedrich behaved more and more noticeably. Everyone around us turned to stare. It embarrassed me. Finally, Friedrich bent close to me. Like a little girl, he whispered in my ear, I kept something from you. We Jews aren't allowed to see movies anymore. It's forbidden. If they find me here, I'll be sent to a camp. I must get away. Help me quick." The older usherette was pushing her way through to us. Friedrich still hesitated. The usherette came closer. Friedrich leaped up. "Stop!" cried the usherette. Friedrich tried to squeeze through. The legs of the other people in our row were in the way. The usherette caught up with him. "I know what you're up to," she said loudly, addressing the whole room. "When IDs are examined, you disappear and hide, and as soon as it gets dark, you slink back in." I went and stood beside Friedrich. Come on, out with it," the usherette asked Friedrich. "Then you can go wherever you wish." "Here it is," I said, handing her mine. "I wasn't speaking to you," the usherette said. This is the one I'm talking to." "We belong together," I burst out, but regretted the words the moment I spoke them. The usherette hadn't been listening. Friedrich was trembling, his face a dark red. He stammered, I left it at home." The young usherette had come up from behind. "Why don't you leave this boy in peace?" she suggested. "Don't make such a fuss. It's time, anyway." Friedrich pleaded, "Please, I want to leave. I'll go voluntarily." Grinning, the older usherette put her hands on her hips and said, "There's something wrong here, I can tell." No, Friedrich protested. Quick as a flash, the usherette grabbed hold of Friedrich's jacket lapels, and she put her hand in his pocket. "And what's this here?" she sneered, pulling out the case with Friedrich's ID. "Give it to me!" Friedrich screamed. "I want my ID!" He tried to tear it out of her hand, but she just leaned back, grinning, holding the case out of his reach. Friedrich behaved like someone gone mad. The younger usherette tried to calm him down. Meanwhile, her colleague was examining Friedrich's identification card. At once, her face grew serious. Well, without hesitating, she handed the identification back to him. "Come on," she ordered. Friedrich pushed through the row and followed her to the side exit. I stayed behind him. Everyone's eyes followed us. By the side exit, the usherette took Friedrich's arm and led him outside. Reproachfully, she said, "You must be tired of life. You must be dying to go to a concentration camp, huh?" Behind us, the lights went out, and the victory fanfares of the weekly newscast sounded. So we see in this chapter is 1940. 1940 is the first year after the war broke out in 1939, and clearly restrictions on Jews in Nazi Germany have really tightened down. And what we see here is Friedrich, a young boy of 15, so roughly the same age as most secondary school students, wants to go to the cinema. But as a Jew, he's not allowed to go to the cinema. And what you see in this period in Nazi Germany is life becomes more and more difficult for Jewish people. and it's a campaign by the Hitler's regime to scapegoat the Jews and blame them for all the problems that the Germans have had to suffer, and this is how they go about doing this. But we'll see that things get even worse as we move on. So we're going to the next chapter, Benches, page 109, 1940. Friedrich suddenly appeared in the center of town. Can you spare me some time? I want to tell you something. My father wouldn't understand, and anyway, he never listens properly anymore, and I have to tell someone. I just have to. Honestly, it won't take long. Without waiting for my answer, he began to walk beside me. It started about 4 weeks ago, he began. I was going to collect a pound of noodles with a friend in the suburb had promised us, and I walked past the old church and through the street with trees. You know, the one with the tram turns left. The trees are all lime trees, and they smelled so strongly because they were in bloom then. I'd gotten as far as the red brick building. I hadn't been paying attention, just meandering along. That's when I suddenly saw the girl in front of me. She had very small feet and black hair. I walked behind her for a long time, closely watching how she set down her feet, moved her head, and how she carried the heavy shopping net. There were apples in the net, and those with the crinkly skin. How I would love one of those apples. If one falls out of the net, I thought, I'll speed it away. I was still picturing this in my mind when the net went crack and all the apples rolled into the street. The girl turned at once, put her hands to her mouth and said, "Oh, what a stinking war net!" She had grey eyes, grey with a bit of blue in them. They looked great with her black hair. She was just beautiful. I helped her pick up the apples and we put them back in the net. But the net wouldn't mend properly, so we carried it together to her house. Her name's Helga. Her father is a soldier. She works in a kindergarten, and that day, her day off, she'd gone to the country and traded hand-knitted pot holders for the apples. And when we got to her door, she asked me very sweetly and said, "Thank you. Auf Wiedersehen." And she gave me one of the apples as a present. I didn't eat it, though. I'm still saving it as a memory. I quickly ran to our friend and picked up the noodles. On my way home, I walked by the kindergarten and asked when she stopped work at night. From then on, I stood and waited by the kindergarten every evening, and as soon as Helga came out, I always walk where she had to see me. And when she'd look at me, I always said hello right away. At first, her eyes just grew large. She looked even more beautiful then. I can't tell you how happy that made me. We never said much to each other. It was just good walking side by side, and sometimes Helga even looked at me. All Helga knew about me was my name was Friedrich Schneider, nothing else. And I couldn't tell her anything, otherwise she would have let me meet. She wouldn't have let me meet her anymore. Well, the Sunday before last, we had our first date. We were going to meet in the town park, and my father had already wondered what I was doing out every evening. But when he saw me getting dressed up, he shook his head and said, "Think about what you're doing, Friedrich." That's all he said. He turned away then, but I went all the same. The weather was beautiful, the roses were beginning to bloom, the park was fairly empty, only a few mothers were pushing their baby carriages around. Helga wore a dark red dress with her black hair and those grey eyes, and when she looked at me, I would feel it inside me, and those small feet, and when I think of it, I had brought Helga a slim volume of poetry, and she was delighted with it, and that I felt ashamed. We walked through the town park, and Helga recited poems, and she knew many by heart. Again and again, I searched out lonely paths where we would hopefully meet nobody, and after we'd been walking for a while, Helga wanted to sit down. Well, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't really refuse her such a thing, but I could think of an excuse. We came to some of the green benches, and Helga simply sat down. You know, I stood in front of the bench, shifting from one foot to the other. I didn't dare sit down. I kept looking to see if anyone was coming. Why don't you sit down? Helga asked. But I couldn't think of an answer. So when she said, sit down, I actually sat down. But I wasn't comfortable. What if an acquaintance came by? I slid back and forth on the bench. Helga noticed, and she took a small bar of chocolate from her pocket and gave me some. I hadn't eaten chocolate for who knows how long, but I couldn't enjoy it. I was much too nervous. I even forgot to say thank you. Helga had the little book of poems on her lap, and she wasn't reading it. She was looking at me, and from time to time she'd ask me something, and I can't remember what I replied, but I was so terribly afraid there on the green bench. All at once, Helga stood up. She took my arm and pulled me along. We hadn't gone far when we reached the yellow bench, which was marked for Jews only. Helga stopped by this bench and said, would it make you feel better if we sat here? I got a shock. How do you know? I asked. Helga sat down on the yellow bench and said, it occurred to me, she said, that so simply and matter-of-factly, but I really couldn't sit on a yellow bench with this girl. I pulled Helga up and took her home. I could have howled with disappointment, the beautiful Sunday gone, but I was much too nervous to go on walking hand in hand and tell her about me. But Helga behaved the whole time as if it were natural to go out with a Jew. She told me about her home, about the children in the kindergarten, about her vacations, and she took my hand and held it tightly. I could have fallen around her neck and wept, but I was much too excited and stupid to do or say anything sensible like that. Helga stopped outside her door. She looked long into my eyes, and then she said, we'll meet again next Sunday, but we won't go to the town park. Instead, we'll go to the country where there are real woods, where they don't have yellow benches. I tried to talk her out of it, but she stopped me with a kiss, and we'd gone into the house. I wandered around the town all that evening and half the night. I didn't go home until long after curfew. Luckily, no one caught me, but Father was quite furious. I debated the whole week whether or not to go. When Sunday came, I didn't go after all. I couldn't, you see. The girl would be sent to a concentration camp if she was seen with me. So I wonder if you can imagine, boys, what that would be like if you're 15 years old and you meet a young girl that you're interested in, and you can't sit on the same bench with her for fear that you might be arrested or you might be ridiculed, and then a young girl who's clearly interested in you, you decide you can't meet because it's too dangerous for her to meet that person. Very, very worrying times, and so incredibly difficult. I wonder if we would have made the same decision as Friedrich did, to put her before himself. So we're going to read one more chapter. We've got about 10 minutes, so we'll read one more chapter. The Rabbi, in 1941. We're 2 years into the war. Obviously, things will be difficult, much more difficult, both in Germany now because of the money it costs to sort of rage a war like this, but also across the rest of Europe, and things are getting very difficult for the Jewish people in terms of things like concentration camps and extermination camps, etc. And I'm sure you've heard stories about places where they would take, where the concentration camps where the Jewish people were taken. So we'll read on. The Rabbi, 1941. An aunt had given us a small sack of potatoes. That evening, I helped Mother put the treasure away and ration it. A little basket was filled for the Schneiders. Mother Schneider's, mother listened intently, and when she heard footsteps above, she sent me upstairs with the basket. I think that word is really interesting. My mother put the treasure away. We're talking about a few potatoes here. And so, this is Hans. This is the Richter family, not the Schneider family. So these are the people that should, in many ways, be doing better in Nazi Germany. But they're talking about potatoes as being a treasure. It gives us a sense, perhaps, of how tough times are, even for the normal Jewish people. German people during this period in Germany in 1941. I climbed the stairs and rang the bell and waited. When no one appeared at the door, I rang again. But nothing moved inside the Schneider's apartment. I could have sworn someone was upstairs, Mother said. You can try again when we hear someone go up. Perhaps they just don't want to be disturbed. A little later, Friedrich came up the stairs. I knew his step. I grabbed the basket and tried to catch him on the stairs, but the door fell shut before I could reach him. Again, I pressed the bell. Again, in vain. In vain means without any response. After the third ring, I put down the basket and knocked because I knew there was somebody in the apartment. Friedrich! I called Friedrich! At last, the door opened, but Herr Schneider, not Friedrich, stood before me. He looked at me crossly, then pulled me inside so quickly that I left my basket outside the door. I had to go out again to fetch the potatoes, but in the hall I said, "That's why I came, to deliver these potatoes." Herr Schneider still looked unfriendly. To scold a verb to tell someone off. He asked his father. Herr Schneider turned away from me. That still doesn't give you the right to speak to me in that tone of voice. At his son. How dare you? But Friedrich didn't keep it. Is it my fault that you lose your reason the moment rid of you? Herr Schneider's voice grew louder. It's not me who's lost his reason, but you. Otherwise, you wouldn't talk to your own father like that. If you were in your right mind, you wouldn't shout, Friedrich retorted. Why don't you stand by the window while you're at it and tell the whole street why you're so upset? Beside himself and almost in tears, Herr Schneider answered, Yes, I am upset, but I can't help it. I'm afraid. I'm dying of fear. Would you like to throw him out into the street then? Friedrich hissed. Do you want to sacrifice him to calm your fears? Ugh! His father wept. Sobs shook his body. Furious and sad at the same time, Friedrich stared at him. They had apparently forgotten all about me. Then the living room door opened softly. An old, bearded man stepped out. When he saw me standing in the hall, he was startled, but he controlled himself at once. Calmly, he said, No one shall quarrel because of me. No one shall be afraid for my sake. I am leaving. No! Friedrich and his father shouted almost simultaneously. Herr Schneider spread his arms wide and barred the apartment door. His face was wet with tears, but he said, No, Rabbi, you stay. Almost imperceptibly, the rabbi shook his head. It's too late now. He has seen me. And he pointed at me. Friedrich leapt to my side. I can vouch for him, he said. He won't give anything away. But the rabbi wasn't convinced. We have too many witnesses, and that is bad. Why should I endanger them all? I am old. I will know how to bear it. And the King of the universe, his name be praised, will help me. Herr Schneider had regained his control. He pushed the rabbi, Friedrich, and me into the living room. Only then did he speak. This gentleman is a well-known rabbi, he told me. The rabbi waved this aside and continued. The Nazis are searching for me. I am hiding in the Schneider's apartment, not for long. Friends are going to help me further. He stood right in front of me. You know what will happen to me if I am caught? If the Lord our God has pity on me, death, otherwise unspeakable suffering. But this not only threatens me, it also threatens those who have given me shelter and kept me hidden. I looked at my feet and said nothing. I also know, the rabbi continued, what will happen to you if you don't inform against me. You, and you alone, must decide our fate. If it's too difficult a burden for you to carry, say so that we may at least save Friedrich and his father. I will not curse you if you tell me to leave. Herr Schneider, the rabbi, and Friedrich all looked at me, and I didn't know what to do. The rabbi was a stranger to me, and what about my mother and father? Didn't they stand closer to me than this Jew? Might I endanger myself and them for the sake of a stranger? Would I never give myself away? Would I be able to bear the secret, or would I suffer under it like Herr Schneider? The longer I hesitated, the more urgent the three faces before me became. I don't know what to do, I said very softly. I don't know. So we'll probably leave it there for today. Just so you're aware, a rabbi is so very similar to a priest in the Jewish faith. They serve the same function in terms of delivering prayer service and things like that. And this is clearly a very well known one. But what we can see here is even someone like Hans, who has a really good friend, or who is a Jew, who's trying to help their family, is torn by what to do in this period of Nazi Germany by fear, because he knows that if he doesn't report on the rabbi, that him and his family will suffer. So you will see that it's a regime of fear, and where we can learn from this is by being really thoughtful and really careful about what we listen to and how we interpret it, and making sure that we are not allowed to be governed by fear and rumor, but we look at the evidence and we do the right thing. So tomorrow we will move on to the next chapter, and I think probably perhaps by the end of the week we'll get through this book. And I'm thinking of reading a new book after this called Stone Cold, which is about a homeless boy in London, and a predator who's trying to kill homeless people sleeping on the streets. It's quite a good book, and it's quite a good story. So hopefully, if we finish this one, we'll move on to that. But thank you for joining me this morning, and we'll be back again. Oh, it's Friday. It's not tomorrow, isn't it? Friday. We'll be back again. Take care. Bye-bye.
Oh. Larry. Larry Gavin. Nathan King. No one on